The spotlight always felt like home to her. Standing on stage with her violin tucked under her chin, the weight of 1,000 eyes watching her every move. That's where she belonged. That's where she was meant to be. For years, people knew her name. They bought tickets months in advance just to hear her play. Critics wrote beautiful things about her performances. Other musicians looked up to her. She traveled the world, staying in nice hotels, eating at fancy restaurants, living a life most people only dream about. She remembered the last concert like it was yesterday. Vienna. The opera house was packed. She wore a red dress that night, her favorite one. The orchestra behind her, the conductor's gentle nod, and then silence. That beautiful silence before the first note. She lifted her bow and the music began to flow. The audience didn't just listen. They felt every note. She could see it in their faces. Some closed their eyes and swayed. Others sat perfectly still, afraid to break the spell. When she finished, the applause was deafening. People stood. They cheered. Some even cried. That was 3 years ago. 3 years that felt like a lifetime. The accident happened on a Tuesday. She was driving home from a rehearsal, thinking about nothing in particular. Maybe what she'd have for dinner. Maybe the upcoming tour in Japan. Normal thoughts for a normal evening. Then everything changed in a split second. She didn't see the truck running the red light. One moment she was waiting at the intersection and the next, chaos. The sound of metal crushing. Glass shattering. Her body jerking against the seatbelt in pain. So much pain. When she woke up in the hospital, her first thought was about her violin. Had it survived? It was in the back seat. Her manager told her later that it shattered into pieces. Somehow that hurt more than her injuries. The doctors came in with serious faces. They talked about nerve damage. They used big medical words she didn't understand. But she understood the main point clearly enough. Her left hand would never work the same way again. The fingers that once danced across the strings with perfect precision were now clumsy and slow. The grip strength was gone. The delicate control that took years to develop had vanished overnight. She kept asking them the same question. Can I play again? Can I perform? They never gave her a straight answer. They talked about physical therapy, about giving it time, about managing expectations, but she could see the truth in their eyes. Her career was over. At first, she didn't believe them. She tried to play as soon as she got home from the hospital. Her hand wouldn't cooperate. The fingers wouldn't move the way her brain commanded them to. Every attempt ended with the violin clattering to the floor and tears streaming down her face. The bills started coming. Hospital bills, surgery bills, physical therapy bills. Her insurance covered some of it, but not enough. Not nearly enough. She had some savings, sure. She'd made good money during her career. But she'd also spent good money. The fancy apartment, the designer clothes, the expensive restaurants. She thought the money would keep coming forever. Her manager called less and less. Concert offers dried up completely. Other violinists took her place. The music world moved on without her. That's the thing about being replaceable. No matter how special you think you are, there's always someone waiting in the wings. Friends stopped calling too. Or maybe she stopped answering. It was hard to tell the difference after a while. She didn't want their pity. She didn't want to hear them say, "I'm so sorry," one more time. She didn't want to see that look in their eyes, the one that said, "I'm glad it's not me." 6 months after the accident, she had to sell her backup violin. The one her grandmother gave her when she turned 16. The one that meant everything to her. But rent was due, and the landlord didn't accept sentimental value as payment. A year after the accident, she moved out of her luxury apartment into a tiny studio across town. The kind of place where you could hear your neighbors arguing through the walls, where the elevator never worked and the heat was always either too much or not enough. She applied for jobs. Retail positions, office work, anything, but what skills did she have? She could play violin. She could read music. She could perform in front of thousands of people. None of that translated to a resume that got her hired anywhere decent. The rejections piled up. Too overqualified for some jobs, not qualified enough for others. No recent work experience, too expensive to hire, too risky, always something. She was running out of money, running out of options, running out of hope. That's when she saw the ad. Janitorial position available. Night shift. No experience necessary. Decent pay. Benefits after 90 days. She stared at that ad for a long time. Part of her wanted to crumble. This wasn't supposed to be her life. She was supposed to be someone. She was supposed to matter. But another part of her, the practical part that had learned to survive, knew she needed the job. Pride didn't pay bills, she applied. They hired her the next day. The irony hit her on her first night of work. The address seemed familiar, but she didn't realize why until she walked through the doors. The Grandview Performing Arts Center. She'd performed there 5 years ago. A sold-out show. Standing ovation. Encore after encore. Now she was there to clean the toilets. She stood in the lobby for a moment, memories flooding back. She could almost hear the echo of applause, almost see herself walking through these same doors in an evening gown, confident and celebrated. The supervisor handed her a uniform, showed her where the cleaning supplies were kept, explained her duties. Mop the floors, clean the bathrooms, empty the trash, wipe down the seats, make everything spotless for tomorrow's show, she wanted to tell him. Wanted to say, I used to perform here. People paid hundreds of dollars to hear me play. I was somebody, but what good would it do? It would only make things more awkward, more pathetic, so she put on the uniform, grabbed the mop, and got to work. That first night she worked slowly. Everything took longer than it should have. Her damaged hand made even simple tasks difficult. Gripping the mop handle, wringing out the water, lifting the trash bags. Around midnight she found herself in the main concert hall. The stage where she once stood. The seats where thousands had applauded. Now it was just her and her cleaning cart. She sat down in one of the seats. Just for a moment. Just to remember what it felt like from this side. The stage looked smaller from here. Less magical. More ordinary. She didn't cry. She'd cried enough in the past year. Instead, she just sat there, a woman in a janitor's uniform, sitting in an empty concert hall at midnight, wondering how her life had gotten here. Then she stood up, grabbed her mop, and finished her work. Because that's what survivors do. They keep going, even when the music stops. 3 months into the job, she'd become a ghost. That's what it felt like anyway, walking through the halls of the Performing Arts Center like she didn't exist. Like she was invisible, and maybe that's exactly what she wanted. She learned the rhythm of the building. Learned when to hide in the supply closet while the musicians walked by after rehearsals. Learned which hallways to avoid during evening performances. Learned how to keep her head down, her eyes on the floor, her presence as small as possible. The uniform helped. Baggy and shapeless, 2 sizes too big. She wore it like armor. Added a baseball cap pulled low over her face. Kept her hair tied back in a simple ponytail. No makeup, no jewelry. Nothing that would make anyone look twice. Sometimes former colleagues walked right past her. People she'd shared stages with. People who'd attended her birthday parties. People who'd called her a genius. They never recognized her. Why would they? They weren't looking for her here. And she certainly wasn't looking to be found. The worst was Tuesday nights. That's when the symphony orchestra rehearsed. She'd hear them warming up while she cleaned the lobby. The familiar sounds of tuning. The scales. The snippets of melodies as musicians practiced difficult passages. And the violins. Always the violins. She'd stop sometimes, standing perfectly still with a mop in her hands, just listening. Her fingers would twitch involuntarily, muscle memory trying to play along, but she'd catch herself, shake her head, and get back to work. That life was over. This was her life now. There was another janitor on the night shift. An older man, probably in his 60s, with kind eyes and a quiet demeanor. He'd been working there for 15 years. Knew every corner of the building. Every creaky floorboard. Every temperamental light switch. They didn't talk much at first. Just polite nods when they passed each other in the hallways. A brief good evening at the start of their shifts. The kind of surface-level interaction that never goes deeper. But he noticed things. She could tell. He noticed how she'd pause outside the concert hall doors when music was playing, how she'd linger in certain spots, staring at the walls like she was seeing something no one else could see, how her hands moved sometimes, fingers dancing through invisible movements. One night during their break, he sat down next to her in the small employee room. She was eating a sandwich, not really hungry, but knowing she should eat something. "You know this place well," he said. It wasn't a question. She looked up, surprised. "I'm still learning where everything is." He smiled. "That's not what I meant." She went back to her sandwich, not wanting to continue this conversation. "It's okay," he said gently. We've all got our stories. I don't need to know yours. Just wanted you to know that I see you. Really see you. And whatever brought you here, it's not who you are. She felt tears threatening, but blinked them back. Sometimes where we are is exactly who we are. Nah, he said, standing up. Sometimes where we are is just where we're passing through. After that night, something shifted. They talked more. Nothing deep. Nothing that required her to explain her past. Just small conversations about normal things. The weather, the broken coffee machine, the way the new supervisor always forgot to order enough trash bags. It felt good to be treated like a regular person. Not a has-been, not a tragedy, just someone doing a job. He started covering for her when she needed a few extra minutes on break. Would take on some of her heavier tasks when her hand was acting up. Never made a big deal about it. Never asked for anything in return. Just quiet kindness from someone who understood that everyone's fighting battles no one else can see. One night, about 4 months into the job, he mentioned something casual. Almost like it didn't matter. You know, there's a storage room on the 3rd floor, past the administrative offices. Nobody ever goes up there. It's full of old equipment, props from shows that closed years ago, instruments that don't get used anymore, real mess. Been meaning to clean it up, but nobody seems to care if it gets done or not. She nodded, not sure why he was telling her this. Sometimes, he continued, when the building feels too heavy, I go up there. Sit for a while. It's quiet, private, nobody bothers you. He walked away after that, leaving her with that information. It took her 2 weeks to work up the courage to check it out. The 3rd floor was darker than the rest of the building. Fewer lights, less traffic. The administrative offices closed at 6, so by the time her shift started at 11, it was completely deserted. She found the storage room at the end of a long hallway. The door wasn't locked. Inside, it was exactly as he'd described. Chaos, boxes stacked on boxes, old stage props, costume racks, fake trees from some long-forgotten production, and in the corner, covered in dust, instruments. Her heart started beating faster. She walked over slowly, like approaching something sacred. There were old trumpets with dents in them, a clarinet with a cracked reed, a cello missing strings, and violins, 3 of them in various states of disrepair. She picked one up with shaking hands, wiped the dust off with her sleeve. It wasn't a good violin, probably a student model from decades ago. The varnish was chipped. One of the tuning pegs was loose. But it was a violin. She tucked it under her chin. The familiar weight. The familiar shape. Her damaged hand protested as she tried to position her fingers, but she ignored the pain. She didn't have a bow. Didn't matter. She just stood there holding it, feeling something she hadn't felt in 3 years. Not hope exactly, not yet, but something close to it. A tiny spark in the darkness. She put it back carefully and left the room. Went back to her cleaning duties. Mopped floors. Emptied trash. Finished her shift like normal, but something had changed. The next night she went back, and the night after that. She started bringing the violin back to life, found an old bow in one of the boxes. The horsehair was brittle but usable. Spent her break slowly, carefully tuning it, 1 string at a time, testing the pegs, getting it as close to playable as possible. It took a week before she tried to actually play. Her hand cramped immediately. The fingers wouldn't cooperate. The sound was awful, scratchy and thin, and nothing like what she used to produce. She wanted to give up. Wanted to throw the violin across the room and be done with it. What was the point? She'd never be who she was. Never play the way she used to. But she came back the next night anyway. And the night after that, she started learning her hand all over again. What it could do now, what it couldn't. The movements that were possible and the ones that weren't. It was like learning a completely different instrument. Everything she'd known for decades didn't apply anymore. Some nights she'd only manage a few notes before the pain became too much. Other nights she'd play for her entire break, working through scales so slowly a beginner could have done better. But slowly, so slowly she almost didn't notice. Things started to change. She found new ways to finger certain notes, discovered different bow techniques that worked with her damaged hand, started adapting pieces she used to play, modifying them to fit her new limitations. The music didn't sound the same. It wasn't polished. It wasn't perfect. But it was music. And after 3 years of silence, that was everything. She never played during work hours. Only on breaks. Only in that dusty storage room where nobody would hear. It was her secret, her private rebellion against everything that had tried to break her. And for the first time since the accident, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she was still a musician after all. 2 months of secret practice. 2 months of slowly rebuilding something she thought was lost forever. Her hands still didn't work right. Probably never would. But she was learning to work with it instead of against it. The sessions became the only thing she looked forward to. She'd rush through her cleaning duties, making sure everything was spotless so nobody would complain. Then she'd slip up to the 3rd floor, close that storage room door, and for 30 glorious minutes she wasn't a janitor. She was a musician again. The older janitor never asked her about it directly, but sometimes he'd smile at her in a way that said he knew. He'd tell her to take an extra 10 minutes on break, or he'd handle the trash on the 3rd floor himself, giving her privacy. His quiet protection meant everything. She started experimenting with different techniques. Her damaged fingers couldn't press the strings with the same strength as before, so she found lighter ways to create sound. She couldn't shift positions as quickly, so she learned to make the music work within smaller ranges. Every limitation forced her to be creative. The strangest thing was how it changed the music itself. The pieces she used to play with technical perfection now sounded different. Slower in some places, stripped down, raw. She'd never played this way before, never had to. But there was something honest about it, something real. She started working on something new, not a famous piece from a famous composer. Her own music, little melodies that came to her during the day, phrases that fit her hand exactly as it was now, not as it used to be. She'd hum them while mopping floors, then try them out during her practice sessions. It felt like learning to walk again, clumsy at first, frustrating, but gradually, step by step, something was building. One night she got lost in the music. Really lost. She was working through a section she'd been struggling with all week, finally getting it right. The notes were flowing. Her hand was cooperating. For those few minutes, everything else disappeared. She didn't hear the door open, didn't hear the footsteps, didn't notice anything until she opened her eyes and saw someone standing there. Her heart stopped. A man in a suit, probably in his 40s, stood in the doorway. He wasn't security, wasn't a janitor. The way he dressed, the way he carried himself, management, maybe higher than that. She lowered the violin, feeling her face flush hot with embarrassment and fear. This was it. She'd be fired, caught using the building's property without permission, playing on company time, trespassing in areas she probably shouldn't be in. "I'm sorry," she started, her voice shaky. I shouldn't have." He held up a hand, stopping her. His face wasn't angry. He looked stunned, confused, like he'd seen something impossible. "How long have you been playing up here?" His voice was quiet. She clutched the violin tighter. "A couple months. I finish all my work first. I never skip anything. That's not what I'm asking." He stepped closer. "Where did you learn to play like that?" She didn't know how to answer. The truth felt too big, too complicated, too painful to explain. "I heard the music from downstairs," he continued. "I'm working late in my office and I heard it coming through the vents. That technique, it's unusual, different. I've never heard anyone play quite like that before." She looked down at the violin. "I had an accident. My hand doesn't work the way it should. I'm just trying to adapt. Can you play something else? I really should get back to work. Please." Something in his voice made her look up. It wasn't a command. It was a request. Almost pleading. She didn't know why she agreed. Maybe because he was the first person in years to ask her to play. Maybe because some part of her wanted to be heard again, even if it was just by one person in a dusty storage room. She lifted the violin, chose something she'd been working on. Her own composition, the one she'd pieced together over weeks of late-night sessions. It was short, simple, built around what her hand could do rather than what it couldn't. She played with her eyes closed. Easier that way. Didn't have to see his reaction. Didn't have to watch him realize how far she'd fallen from whatever skill he thought he'd heard before. When she finished, the silence stretched out. She opened her eyes. He was staring at her like he was trying to solve a puzzle. "What's your name?" She hesitated. Her real name meant nothing to most people now, but to someone in the music world, someone who worked at a performing arts center, it might mean recognition, and recognition meant questions she didn't want to answer. "Does it matter?" she said instead. "That piece you just played. Did you write it? She nodded. It's remarkable. The way you've adapted to your injury, you're not trying to hide it. You've made it part of the music itself. I've been in this business 20 years and I've never heard anything quite like it. She didn't know what to say. Compliments felt foreign now, uncomfortable. I know who you are, he said softly. It just clicked. I saw you perform once. Years ago. You were... He stopped himself. I'm sorry. I can't imagine what happened to bring you here. Life happened. She put the violin back in its case, ready to leave. Ready for this conversation to be over. Wait, please. He pulled out a business card. I'm the artistic director here. We have a concert series starting next month. New voices. It features experimental performances, contemporary pieces, things that push boundaries. She shook her head before he could continue. I'm not a performer anymore, but you are. I just heard you. I'm a janitor who plays in a storage room when nobody's listening. That's not the same thing. What if it could be? She finally looked at him directly. You don't understand. I can't play the way I used to. I can't do what people expect. I'd be a disappointment, an embarrassment. Or, he said gently, you'd be exactly what people need to hear. Music doesn't have to be perfect to be powerful. Sometimes the most moving performances are the ones that show us it's okay to be broken. She wanted to walk away, wanted to tell him no and go back to her safe, invisible life. But something in his words hit deep. I need to think about it, she heard herself say. Of course. Take all the time you need. He set his business card on top of a box. But I hope you'll consider it. What you're doing up here in secret, other people should hear it. He left and she stood alone in the storage room, holding a violin that wasn't even hers, wearing a janitor's uniform, with a business card that promised something she was terrified to want. The older janitor found her 20 minutes later, still standing in the same spot. You okay? He asked. Someone heard me play. And? He wants me to perform. In front of people. On an actual stage, the older man smiled. Sounds like the universe is trying to tell you something. Or it's trying to humiliate me one more time. He put a hand on her shoulder. You've been coming up here every night for 2 months, teaching yourself to play again with a hand that doesn't work. That's not someone who's ready to give up. That's someone who's ready to fight back. She looked at the business card, then at the violin, then at her damaged hand. Maybe he was right. Maybe it was time to stop hiding. Or maybe she'd walk onto that stage and prove to herself once and for all that some things, once broken, can't be fixed. Either way, she was tired of being invisible, tired of pretending she was okay with this half-life she'd been living. She picked up the business card and slipped it into her pocket. Whatever happened next, at least she'd know she tried. She kept the business card in her locker for 3 days. Didn't call, didn't throw it away either. Just let it sit there, a possibility she wasn't ready to face. Work continued as normal. Mop the floors, clean the bathrooms, empty the trash. But everything felt different now. Someone knew her secret. Someone had heard her play. The invisibility she'd worked so hard to maintain had cracked. The artistic director passed her twice in the hallways. Both times he gave her a small nod. Respectful, patient, not pushing, just letting her know the offer still stood. On the 4th day, the older janitor sat down next to her during break. You gonna call him? He asked. I don't know. What's stopping you? She laughed, but there was no humor in it. What's not stopping me? I'm terrified. What if I get up there and freeze? What if my hand gives out? What if people laugh? What if they don't? She shook her head. You don't understand. I used to be really good. Like really good. People had expectations. And now I'm just broken. A shadow of what I was. Maybe that's the point, he said quietly. Maybe people need to see that shadows are real too. That broken things can still be beautiful. She wanted to argue, but the words stuck in her throat. That night, after her shift ended, she stood outside the administrative offices. The lights were still on in one of them, the artistic director's office. She could see him through the window working at his desk. She almost walked away. Almost convinced herself this was a terrible idea. But her feet carried her forward, and before she could change her mind, she knocked on the door. He looked up surprised, then smiled. Come in. She stepped inside, still wearing her uniform. I'll do it. 1 performance. That's all. That's all I'm asking. But I have conditions. She'd thought about this. I don't want any publicity beforehand. No announcements about who I used to be. No comparisons to my old performances. I just want to play and let the music speak for itself. He nodded. I can do that. And if it goes badly, it won't. You don't know that. You're right, he said. But I know what I heard in that storage room, and I think other people deserve to hear it too. They set a date. 3 weeks away. It felt like forever and no time at all. The next few weeks were a blur of terror and preparation. She practiced more intensely than she had since the accident. Not in the storage room anymore. The artistic director gave her access to one of the small rehearsal spaces. A proper room with good acoustics and a real music stand. She worked on her piece, refining it, making it stronger. Some nights it flowed beautifully. Other nights her hand cramped so badly she had to stop after 10 minutes. The inconsistency terrified her. What if it happened during the performance? The older janitor became her unofficial coach. He'd sit in the rehearsal room during breaks, listening. He didn't know anything about music, but he knew about people. About fear. About pushing through when everything in you wants to quit. You're overthinking it, he said one night when she was particularly frustrated. You're trying to be perfect. That's not what this is about anymore. Then what is it about? Truth. You're telling the truth about what it's like to lose something and find it again in a different form. That's more powerful than any perfect performance. News started spreading despite the artistic director's promise of discretion. Not about who she was, he kept that part quiet, but about the performance itself. A mysterious violinist, an unconventional style, a world premiere of an original composition. The concert series was popular. When tickets went on sale, they sold out in 2 days. She tried not to think about that. Tried not to imagine hundreds of eyes watching her, hundreds of people with expectations. But the thoughts came anyway, usually at 3 a.m. when sleep wouldn't come. 1 week before the performance, she had a full panic attack during practice. Her hand locked up. Her breathing went shallow. The room spun. She had to sit on the floor with her head between her knees, convinced she was about to pass out. The artistic director found her like that. I can't do this, she said. I thought I could, but I can't. He sat down next to her on the floor. Want to know a secret? Every artist I've ever worked with, and I mean every single one, has had this moment. The night before, the week before, sometimes the hour before. It never goes away. That's supposed to make me feel better? No, but knowing you're not alone might. He told her about his own experience as a young musician, how he froze on stage during an important audition, how it derailed his performing career and led him to administration instead, how he spent years thinking he'd failed until he realized he'd just found a different path. Your path isn't the one you thought you'd take, he said, but it's still a path, and it might lead somewhere even more interesting. The night before the performance, she couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, could barely think straight. She went to work early, even though she'd taken the night off. The building felt different, knowing what was coming tomorrow. The older janitor was there. Of course he was. Couldn't stay away, he asked. Needed to see it one more time. The stage. Before tomorrow. They walked to the concert hall together. He unlocked the door and they stepped inside. The empty seats. The stage. The lights turned down low. She walked up onto the stage. Stood in the center. Looked out at all those empty seats. You know what I see when I look at this place? The older janitor said from the doorway. I see possibility. Every empty seat is someone who's going to hear something they've never heard before. Someone who might need to hear exactly what you have to say. What if I disappoint them? What if you don't? She stood there for a long time, imagining tomorrow. The lights. The people. The moment when she'd lift the violin and everything would become real. I'm scared, she admitted. Good. That means it matters. She went home that night and tried to rest. Managed a few hours of fitful sleep. Woke up with the sun, her heart already racing. This was it. The day she'd been dreading and preparing for in equal measure. She arrived at the venue 6 hours early. Too anxious to stay home. The artistic director was already there, finalizing details. He gave her space, understanding she needed time to prepare mentally. She sat in the dressing room, staring at herself in the mirror. The same face that used to wear expensive makeup and designer gowns. Now bare, real, older, more tired, but somehow more herself than she'd ever been. The hours crawled by. Other performers arrived. Sound checks happened. The building slowly filled with energy and anticipation. At 15 minutes before curtain, Someone knocked on her dressing room door. The older janitor stood there, dressed in his regular clothes instead of his uniform. "Couldn't miss this," he said. "Got a ticket? Front row." Something about that simple gesture broke through her fear. This man who'd worked beside her, who'd protected her secret, who'd encouraged her when she wanted to give up. He believed in her. Maybe that was enough. "Thank you," she said, "for everything. Don't thank me yet. Go out there and show them what you've been hiding." 5 minutes. The stage manager gave her the signal. She picked up the violin. Her hands shook. Her damaged hand throbbed with pain already. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She walked toward the stage, each step feeling both too fast and too slow. Behind the curtain, she could hear the audience settling in. Whispers. Programs rustling. Anticipation building. The artistic director appeared beside her. "Ready?" She wasn't, not even close, but she nodded anyway. "Remember," he said softly, "you're not trying to be who you were. You're showing them who you are now." That's enough. The lights dimmed. The audience quieted. Her cue was coming. She took a deep breath, stepped through the curtain, and walked onto the stage. The spotlight hit her face, and for a moment she couldn't see anything. Just white light and darkness beyond it. Her legs felt weak. Her damaged hand started cramping before she even lifted the violin. This was a mistake. A terrible, humiliating mistake, but her feet kept moving. One step, then another. Until she reached the center of the stage where a simple chair waited. No orchestra behind her. No accompaniment. Just her and a violin that wasn't even hers. She sat down and the audience came into focus. Hundreds of faces. Some she recognized from her past life. Former colleagues in the back rows. Critics she used to know. And in the front row, the older janitor sitting up straight in his best shirt, giving her an encouraging nod. The murmuring started almost immediately. She heard it, even though they tried to be quiet about it. Whispers passing through the crowd like ripples on water. "Is that her? I thought she was gone. What happened to her?" She looked down at her hands. The left one damaged and scarred. The right one, gripping the bow too tightly. Everything in her wanted to run. Then she saw something that changed everything. A young girl, maybe 10 years old, sitting a few rows back. She had a cast on her arm, decorated with colorful markers and stickers. The girl was staring at the stage with wide, hopeful eyes. Something clicked. This wasn't about impressing critics or proving herself to former colleagues. This wasn't even about reclaiming her old life. This was about showing that girl, and everyone else who'd ever felt broken, that you could still make something beautiful. She lifted the violin, tucked it under her chin, the familiar weight, the familiar position. But nothing else about this was familiar. The first note came out shaky. Not perfect. Not even close. Her damaged fingers struggled to press the string properly. The sound wavered. Someone in the audience coughed. She heard someone else shift uncomfortably in their seat, but she didn't stop. She kept going, moving into the piece she'd written. The one built around her limitations. The one that turned her injury into something intentional rather than something to hide. The music was slow, deliberate. Each note held longer than traditional playing would allow. Her hand couldn't move quickly, so she'd written something that didn't need speed. Instead, it needed emotion, vulnerability, truth. She closed her eyes. Easier that way. Let the muscle memory guide her through the passages she'd practiced hundreds of times in that storage room. Her hand cramped. She adjusted, found a different position, kept playing. The piece told a story without words. The fall, the loss, the darkness. Then slowly, carefully, the climb back up. Not to where she'd been, but to somewhere new. Somewhere harder earned and more honest. She poured everything into it. Every midnight practice session. Every moment of frustration. Every time she'd wanted to give up but didn't. Every floor she'd mopped while remembering who she used to be. All of it went into the music. The pain in her hand grew worse. She was maybe 2 minutes from the end, but those 2 minutes felt impossible. The cramping spread up her arm. She could feel the technique falling apart. She thought about stopping, about apologizing and walking off stage. But then she thought about that little girl with the cast. About the older janitor who'd covered for her all those months. About the artistic director who'd taken a chance on her. She pushed through. Modified the ending on the spot, simplifying the passages her hand couldn't handle. It wasn't what she'd planned, but it was what she could give. The final note hung in the air. She held it as long as she could, then lifted the bow. Silence. Complete, absolute silence. Her heart sank. This was it, the confirmation of every fear she'd had. They hated it. She'd embarrassed herself, proven that some things can't be recovered once they're lost. She opened her eyes, ready to face the judgment. The artistic director stood in the wings, and she couldn't read his expression. The audience sat frozen. No one moved. No one made a sound. Then from the front row, the older janitor stood up. He started clapping. Slow at first, steady. Then the little girl with the cast stood up, started clapping too. Someone else rose. Then another. Then another. Within seconds, the entire audience was on their feet. The applause built like a wave, growing louder and louder. Some people were crying. Others were smiling. All of them were clapping. She sat there stunned, barely able to process what was happening. This wasn't the polite applause she used to receive. This was something different. Something deeper. Like they weren't just appreciating the music, they were connecting with it. A woman in the third row was openly sobbing. A man beside her had his hand over his heart. The critics she'd been so worried about were all standing, all clapping. The artistic director appeared on stage, his own eyes suspiciously bright. He gestured for her to stand. She did, her legs shaking. The applause continued. Someone shouted, "Bravo!" Others joined in. The sound filled the hall, filled her chest, filled all the empty spaces that 3 years of loss had carved out. She bowed. Not the elegant, practiced bow of her old life. Just a simple, genuine gesture of gratitude. As she walked off stage, her legs nearly gave out. The artistic director caught her arm. "I told you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I told you they needed to hear it." Backstage, she collapsed into a chair, the adrenaline draining away and leaving her exhausted. Her hand throbbed. Her whole body ached. But she felt more alive than she had in years. The older janitor found her there a few minutes later. He didn't say anything. Just pulled her into a hug that said everything words couldn't. Over the next few days, something unexpected happened. People started talking. Not gossip or pity. Real conversation about what they'd witnessed. Articles appeared online. Not about her comeback or her tragic fall from grace. About the performance itself. About the power of adaptation. About redefining what success means. Musicians with disabilities started reaching out. They'd seen videos someone had recorded. They wanted to know how she'd modified her technique. Could she teach them? The artistic director offered her a residency. Not as a solo performer, her hand couldn't handle that kind of schedule, but as a teacher and occasional performer. Working with musicians who'd faced injuries or disabilities, showing them what she'd learned. She said yes. The Performing Arts Center let her keep her janitorial job too if she wanted it. She thought about that for a long time. Part of her wanted to leave it behind to pretend the chapter never happened, but she decided to stay on part-time. Because that job had taught her something important. It had taught her humility. It had taught her that there's dignity in any honest work. And it had given her the older janitor's friendship, which she wouldn't trade for anything. 6 months later, she stood in one of the rehearsal rooms, teaching a teenager who'd lost partial mobility in his fingers after a sports injury. The kid was frustrated, angry at his body for betraying him. "I'll never play like I used to," he said, his voice breaking. She recognized that pain, had lived it herself. "You're right," she said. "You won't, but you might play something even better. Something nobody else could play because they haven't been where you've been." She showed him some of the techniques she'd developed. Ways to work around the injury. Ways to make it part of the music instead of fighting against it. The kid tried it, fumbling at first. Then something clicked. A small breakthrough. The frustration on his face shifted to something like hope. She smiled, remembering that moment in the storage room when she'd first picked up that dusty violin. When she'd decided to try, even though everything seemed impossible. That's what she told people now when they asked how she'd done it. How she'd gone from concert halls to cleaning floors and somehow found her way back to music. "I stopped trying to recover who I was," she'd say, "and started discovering who I could become." Some nights after teaching or performing, she'd still walk through the empty concert hall. Still remember mopping these floors. Still feel grateful for the fall that had seemed like an ending but turned out to be a beginning. Because the truth was, she hadn't lost everything in that accident. She'd lost one version of herself. But she'd found another. One that was stronger, more resilient, more real. And this version, scarred and imperfect and still fighting, was someone worth becoming.